Hey everybody, Justin here.
And Eric here. How are you doing?
Yeah, doing well after like a
Little
holiday
hiatus?
slumber, I guess. Yeah, melee's from a holiday and COVID. COVID's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Boo.
Yeah, but this is Sonic Boom Live. If anybody's just chiming in and watching for the first time, we do. Eric and I are video game veterans. We have our own company that serves by creating tools for game developers, but we've also been in the industry. Every week we go over the biggest like game industry news, not necessarily rumors or anything that has to do with like opinions per se, but more about like the biggest news pieces that have an impact on the industry, where it's going, how things are shaping up after this, I think, particularly interesting time in the gaming's illustrious history, where we're moving towards streaming. How consoles are viewed is changing significantly. PC is treated almost as like a secondary console in some ways to game development. So lots of interesting trends happening in the game industry. So we kind of report on that. Um, so this week, what are the three topics that we're going to be hitting up, Eric?
Well, first we're gonna look at Nintendo's handling of the Mario movie, and I mentioned that because they released a second trailer,
Yeah,
uh, which we both watched. Uh, the second item we're gonna discuss is in the ongoing saga of the Microsoft and Activision Blizzard buyout. They find themselves between a rock and a hard place with further conversations from potential regulators coming out with discussions about how they're going to view looking at those the merger itself or the acquisition, and we'll look at what the latest reports are from that. And then finally, the European Union has raised some concerns or issues about the potential Apple Google duopoly when it comes to cloud gaming in particular. And
actually,
we,
I should
yeah, go ahead.
clarify. It's not the EU; it's the UK. That was
This,
my fault.
I'm sorry. Yes, you're right. The CMA,
Yeah,
the Competition and Markets Authority in the UK, not the EU, have come out. I'm not sure if it's related. It certainly feels that way, but
yeah.
they 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 apparently was it maybe what through you I think may have been that the either the EU or the CMA, I can't remember which, mentioned something earlier this year, like January February timeframe or something like that, where they were going to. Oh no, this was the UK. It was the CMA. They came out and said that they were going to look into uh, the app, probably as a result actually of the Epic court case. We're going to look into Apple and Google, and this may be a sort of follow up. Yeah, we're going. There's reason to dig into this, and we'll discuss what they said about that as our third item.
Yeah, and I think all three of these, some of them seem like on the surface level not that interesting, but I think there's a bit to dig in on all of these that maybe more than what it's just saying on face value. It's
Yeah.
speculation, not confirmed by any means, and most of them won't be confirmed. But I think we can talk about those pieces.
Yeah.
Um, by the way, if you're new to this, we're on every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern time. Uh, Almost every Thursday around the holidays, we Eric and I both take time off because we deserve it. But but yeah, it's on every Thursday, same sort of thing. So if you like this type of content, like and subscribe to the channel. It would help us better understand what people are interested in seeing. Feel free to comment as well. I will try to respond to what pops up as we're streaming. But yeah, if you like this sort of thing, let us know. So let's just jump right into it. Let's jump into Nintendo's handling of the Mario movie. Do you want to recap this, or do you want me to uh, recap?
Yeah, why don't you give it a recap?
Yeah. Um, the Mario movie, I guess we've known about it for a while. I think shortly after the trailer for Detective Pikachu came out, Nintendo had like officially confirmed that they were going to be moving ahead with a Super Mario Brothers movie. Um, Not that Detective Pikachu was necessarily a Nintendo product. They're stakeholders in the Pokemon company, but they weren't like producers of this movie by any means. But you can clearly see that there's a move from Nintendo to do more about its having its IP represented in cinema. Sorry, I'm just double checking my bit rate because I'm seeing some funky things happening on the scanner. Anyways, um, so yeah, they started showing interest in doing Nintendo based IP movies. Finally, in September, we got like a tweet from Nintendo, and that confirmed the cast, and they showed their first trailer. Prior to that, we knew that Chris Pratt was going to be playing Mario, but we also found out that Jack Black was going to be casted as Bowser, Seth Rogen as Donkey Kong, Keegan Michael Key as Toad, Charlie Day as Luigi. So a pretty star-studded cast at the time. But the casting of Chris Pratt, I think, brought a lot of unwanted ire from the internet. Chris Pratt is kind of a polarizing figure at this point. Besides him being casted in a lot of movies, I think his religious views are what tends to get people irked. Whether or not those things, like, he's not very vocal about it, besides, invoking God in his speeches or anything like and stuff like that. But he's not vocal by any means. And cool, I'm like right now actively removing explicit comments in the in YouTube.
We have explicit. It really?
Yeah, they're for dating sites.
People spamming these things.
Yeah, like literally, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 messages I've had to delete.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Don't
It's a good
I'm
thing
sorry.
Google has a good control over these things.
Yeah.
I'll
Geez.
just report this as well. I don't want to. Cool.
Yeah. Take the time to do that, because.
Anyways, so Chris Pratt drew ire of fans, and most because he's associated with a church in California that has anti-LGBTQ views. So that's sort of what draws negative attention towards Chris Pratt and his casting of Mario. So in the first trailer we got of him, which this is after the point that he had drawn backlash for his casting, they did like a curious thing in the teaser in which they showed very little Mario. It was mostly focusing around Bowser and Jack Black performing as Bowser and his thing. Mario had like, I think, one line in it when he's just like, "Let's go," and that was it. And so this week, Nintendo announced that they would be doing the Nintendo Direct focused on the actual trailer for the Mario movie. So I think it was on Tuesday they showed. Tuesday or Wednesday? Tuesday they showed the full length trailer in which we got to hear Anya Taylor-Joy do her version of Peach. We got an intro from Seth Rogen talking about his interest in doing the franchise. We got to hear Luigi, Charlie Day's Luigi, and then we still got to hear quite little of Chris Pratt's Mario. I think we got him like saying just really small clip snippets there.
He actually had less to say in the second trailer than the first. I just checked. He said something like, "Where is this place?" And then Mushroom Kingdom, here we come.
Yeah,
were the two lines that he said in the first trailer.
Which remarkably few, little to say.
Very little.
Yeah,
very little. Yes.
Yeah. So like, well, what did you think of the trailer? First of all, I guess is this is an opinion part. What did you think of it?
Yeah. So I admittedly I enjoyed it. A lot of it for me, especially the first time, I was like, okay. It was basically I was eating from the memberberry tree, or memberberry bush, I should say. Where, for those who don't know, South Park did a thing where they have these things called the member berries, and they're these little. They look like grapes, but they talk and they go, "Remember Star Wars? Remember the AT-AT?" They're just like, the whole thing is that it's the trend of movies and whatever to um, pique your interest by showing you a new version of a thing that you remember from a childhood or from, a few decades ago, and try to pique your interest and get you to spend money on that again.
Yeah.
And there were many, many instances of that in this trailer too, where the member berry juice was hitting hard. And it's impossible if you're entering into the Mario universe, and Mario, yeah, I guess it's a universe, to not feel that when they show like a montage of different aspects of Mario games. There were elements of Super Smash Brothers and Mario Kart and Yoshi's Island and Super Mario Brothers, the original, and I mean, the list
Yeah, I think they
goes
even make a
on.
mention of Mario Galaxy.
They
Just,
do,
just as
yes,
much, yeah.
yeah. She calls it out. That they have Princess Peach talking.
Yeah.
Princess Peach is a badass, which is pretty cool. Like they're showing her as being in some of the more recent games as an active role rather than the stuck in a castle.
Yeah.
Hopefully they don't revert to that in the movie, but it looks like they're going in the different track. They also show Toad from like when he's the Captain Toad, the explorer or whatever.
Yes, yes. Pardon me.
So
Yeah.
yeah, they.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was gonna say they in the Nintendo Direct they even made a point of calling out the fact that they had Donkey Kong. The rendering that they did of Donkey Kong was based on. They went back to the original Donkey Kong game and sort of cartoony style from that era, skipping over the three-dimensional Donkey Kong we've all sort of grown to know over the last 20 or so years since Donkey Kong Country 64, when they had the first 3D version of Donkey Kong, which was of course done by Rare. So you're still muted. It did not unmute. There we go. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's a bit of an interesting take on it. I think my biggest concern is that I mean Mario games are not known to have plots ever. It's like it's a really
Yes.
loosely cobbled together plot. They can get away with that in the movie if they give it like some sort of
Yeah.
emotional heart. It's just going to be hard for them to escape the same sort of plot that like Sonic had, which is like I'm a fish out of water and this
Yeah.
whole world is weird to me. But like who knows? Illumination's a good animation studio. I'm assuming they're writers. They've gotten good writers on it to create like a plot that's going to be interesting. Yeah, like I say, like or like you're saying, I think my turnoff was that there was a bit too much of the like callback to everything. Like,
Yeah.
look, you know Mario Kart? Yep, we got that there too. It's like, okay, but like, what is this about? Like, yeah,
Yeah.
clearly Mario's not, you know, clearly Mario's gonna be the hero and he's gonna maybe save the princess, but like, what exactly is going on? It's, you know, I guess Bowser like getting revenge or some sort of thing.
So yeah, I mean, what we know of the story so far is Bowser decides to take over the world, which is the story of most mainline Mario games, all the way
Yeah,
up to and including Mario Odyssey, the most recent, where he, the hat and the moonshines. I can't remember what they're called.
I mean, what they're gonna have to
But
do though is they're gonna have to like establish in characters fast enough in this film, and maybe that's why it doesn't have to be so plot heavy, is because they're gonna have to focus on like getting people to accept the fact that Mario is not the Mario that we know from the games. So like,
yeah,
what I and know from growing up with the Mario games is not the same Mario that we're gonna get from this.
right.
And there's enough distinction. Like they chose not to go with the Mario look that's currently like the Mario that you see in games. Instead, they chose like a stylized Illumination, style game where all the characters are recognizable, but like Mario doesn't have his like bubble mustache. It's got like more of like a normal mustache, but it's still unmistakably Mario.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. It's an interesting take. How do you think? Do you think Mario or do you think Nintendo is a bit heavy-handed with the way that they're controlling how they're like rolling out this movie? Because it seems way more controlled than I've seen other movies.
Oh, for sure, I agree. And yes, the fact that there's a Nintendo Direct before every trailer release, and there are two actual commercials that are out of Europe that have further what is it, footage that was not shown in either of the other trailers, but of course it has the localized language dubbing of character voices, so it's a little bit, tells you a little bit of a different story. The one thing I will mention about that is that it sort of feels like the foreign Marios, non-English Marios, may be sort of closer to the iconic Mario voice than Chris Pratt. Right. Although what we saw in this trailer was presumably Chris Pratt's "Let's A Go" and his like "Wahoo" that voice.
Yeah,
which was the extent of him talking in this one, effectively. Yeah. They even did less Mario in this new second trailer. But in terms of getting back to the question, I don't know of another example where a movie has been so tightly controlled. Like, it wasn't just the trailer will release at this date. Here it is. The trailers have the same type of introduction as basically like new characters being dropped for
Smash Brothers.
Smash Brothers, yeah, where they do a whole expose. The fact that we have cast and crew interviews for the movie, before the trailer drops is like, okay, but that's sort of Nintendo style, I guess.
Well, I think also like Nintendo knows how much merchandising they can drive with a film like this, how they're basically purchasing a new generation of viewers. Like, this is going to appeal to children more than anything else, as most Illumination films do, as Sonic did, and it's going to endear like a brand new generation to a character that they may have had limited exposure to, which I think this is why there's so much control. Like, if they fail to do this, then their whole IP catalog is going to be dragged down with it, and any ideas of them doing like a Zelda movie in the future, or Donkey Kong, for instance,
Samus.
Which actually, there's a rumor that a Donkey Kong movie is what's next. But yeah, like, Samus or a Metroid film, all these things are going to be kind of damned if their investment in doing a Super Mario film fails. Like, that's their all-star character, and they can't really afford to fail on this, because it's probably going to damn like the first Mario movie did, right? Like, the original Mario movie, like, it wasn't well received, and that kind of condemned any other Nintendo related film for a while.
That was one of the movies that ended up like that in the original Mortal Kombat, which I posit was better than the second Mortal Kombat. But those,
yes. I don't think anybody's arguing at that point. So
right. I think that was during the period where like the Mario movie came out. There may have been one or two other game related movies that came out and flopped. So then like Hollywood wouldn't touch game movies for a while. They tried Mortal Kombat, which did okay, and then they tried Mortal Kombat 2, which did not do okay. Yeah. And they were like, "Hey, we're not touching them again."
Like, yeah, well, they've dabbled with it, like Assassin's Creed, Doom, those sort of things. But yeah, like there's
more recently, yeah. Especially actually, that I fully enjoyed that movie. But there are, I think as people the generation of kids who grew up with those titles become the main generation. Millennials are sort of taking over the main, and to an extent now, the rising sort of Gen Z. That's where you're going to see a lot of like the the member berry juice is going to try to harness some of those. I expect that in another 15 years we'll have a movie based on what is it, the cops and the dogs who are all Paw Patrol. There you go. Oh, yeah. We'll see Paw Patrol movies. But yeah, well, where we are now with the Mario thing, it's actually Nintendo, being having a tight hold on this makes sense for another reason, and that is that they are also trying to establish the Super Mario World amusement park. And if they can do a good job, that this movie could be viewed as an advertisement for the park in a manner of viewing it. So like, it's part of their multimedia and experience, virtual passive watching, video games, real life enjoyment of the IP.
Yeah.
And this is, as a major Hollywood movie, like a major, go to market for them on this strategy.
Yeah. Yeah, and like the other thing I'll note too, and which may not be as obvious, but like for both Sony and Nintendo, more so than Microsoft, it's just that like they are hitting the peak of what they can do, and this is something we've talked about before. But they're hitting the peak of what they can do within video games, and if they
Mhm.
want to continue to expand, especially for Nintendo, which is a public traded company, and the majority of their revenues come in through sales, like they live and die by the sales of their software and their hardware. The the Switch is a very successful hardware run for them, but their last hardware venture with the Wii U, no, the Wii probably like somewhere in between. It was really successful, then not successful. Um, GameCube not very successful for them. Nintendo 64 successful, Super Nintendo successful, Nintendo successful. So like they have a bad launch and a bad hardware cycle, like their stock prices plummet and they have to climb back up. So I feel like a lot of this now is like there isn't any higher that they're going to really be able to go with their sales. Like the Switch is peak Nintendo, right? Like you can gain marginal growth numbers in there, but like we have not seen much more than an install base of like 130 million consoles in any given generation. It doesn't get larger than that. Like this has been consistently the peak for PS2, PS4. Like this is the case, and for Nintendo to keep growing its revenues and continue to expand their business, I think they're beginning to realize like you just cannot solely rely on hardware and software to meet your numbers. This is them going like, no, we have strong IP, we can actually do something with it. And they, like I said, they can't really afford to fail with the Mario movie doing poorly.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that is must have them nervous is that this is also the first time this generation, this Switch generation, is the first generation where they've had all of their eggs in one basket in the games industry.
Yeah.
In the past, we talked about the console lines, but they're going back to the Game Boy. Basically, every generation of their portable hardware has been a hit, has
Yeah.
done very well for them. Uh, so even in the years where they had like the GameCube and the Wii U, during those periods, especially during the GameCube era, they had the DS, which sold
Right.
like nobody's business, and then continued. They had the 3DS still going during the Wii U era.
Right.
And then, of course, in the Switch, which is both portable and a console, they don't have the 3DS or the DS series anymore. They don't have the Game Boy anymore. Now they just have their one console. And that, if they follow up with a similar strategy and it doesn't do well, then they don't have the other side of that equation to balance it or like cover that loss in expected revenue the way that they did in the past. So
And I can
it's a riskier
imagine
position.
if you looked at like Nintendo's ability to earn money off of merchandising, the success of their console probably has a lot to do with whether or not they have like mind share within the public and whether or not that their merchandising is doing better or worse during that time. So having a movie like that helps them iron out those spots and continue their merchandising, which probably is the most profitable thing they can produce. Right? It's them either selling their IP for it to be printed and then they get a chunk of whatever sold, or they're producing directly plastic toys or whatever else, and those things are cents on the dollar that they get to profit off of it. So like, or well, the cost to produce it is cents on the dollar, and they see huge profit margins there. So yeah, I mean, like, it's not surprising that they're managing this as much as they are, but I just hope they don't end up like shooting themselves in the foot, that they're taking too heavy a hand on the IP and the film and not letting like Illumination just do a good job with it, in which you end up with a film that just largely fails to have any endearing qualities to it, and they end up failing as a result of their interference.
Right. Yeah, that is the major concern here. Now, luckily, to my mind, well, it's a slightly different situation too. Their history includes like Detective Pikachu, but that was a
It
single
wasn't
Pokemon.
Nintendo specifically either.
Right. I mean, that was also Nintendo is they have like a controlling share of Game Freaks or something like that. Their Game Freaks is sort of a second party for Nintendo,
Yep.
so they have exclusivity on the games. But I think, and they in the case of Pokemon Go, that is sort of one of those things where Nintendo had been trying, a handful of games on mobile devices, and that one actually worked. Some of them didn't so much, and they stopped supporting them. Some of the other ones are sort of middling, and they let them go. But that's sort of another way for them to maintain some mind share from their players. But it's a different situation with Pikachu and that game than this one, which is like if Nintendo had to pick one character to be representative of the brand Nintendo, it is Mario. And like, so this is them putting their everything in line. And one thing we don't see is major Japanese movies breaking out of Japan.
Right.
They just don't resonate. I have my own personal theories as to why that is. I don't think I need to pontificate about that. I just will point to the fact that we don't see many Oscar-nominated films that come out of Japan. We have an occasional one. They're usually the art house sort of style in space. And occasionally there have been some animated movies. Ghibli in particular is good about this. Though I will also point out that especially more recent Ghibli movies feel a lot more like traditional or sort of Japanese directed movies.
Yeah.
And that's possibly part of the reason why we haven't seen them come up much. But it's the reason I bring that up is because that could be like if Nintendo, a Japanese, like traditional Japanese company, decides to go in metal, like we could see that effect on the story that the movie presents, and that's something that may have a deleterious effect on Western audience perception of the film.
Yeah. I mean, like kids will probably like it one way or another because it's like that style
Mario
of movie, but
yeah,
I'm hoping that they're able to appeal to like our generation who probably have kids and would be willing to take their kids to like expose a new generation to Nintendo and Mario characters and their IP. But fingers crossed it's good. Like I said, Illumination's a great animation company, so hopefully they've had enough creative control to create something that is going to be interesting and endearing to a new generation.
One last thing I want to say about the trailer too is that I think Jack Black carries the trailer again, like as Bowser. He's the voice of Bowser.
Yeah.
He just like nails it.
Everybody does a good job. It's Chris Pratt that it's just like maybe, but it also feels like his dialogue is being taken out of context for what's being shown. So it's really hard to get a read on like whether or not it's going to work well. Like I said before, like people who are like railing on it, it seems like he's doing a version of like the Super Mario Brothers Super Show version of Mario, which is like the not quite like a bad stereotype of Italian,
right? A New York Italian.
Yeah, it's like it's just a slight New York accent to it that makes it work well enough for a character who's had traditionally only one-liners as dialogue getting like full talking pieces.
Right.
Anyways, let's move on to the next piece here.
Sure. Let's do it.
Microsoft and Blizzard are between a rock and a hard place. This is about quite a bit of news rolled out within the past 2 weeks, where I think there's like 2 or 3 different articles about information that came out of it about Sony offering things to Microsoft, Microsoft offering things to Sony, and Microsoft being rumored to be taking a more aggressive action and finding some sort of middle ground with the EU to make the deal go through. Do you want to recap this, Eric?
Sure. Yeah. So we've covered this sort of ongoing saga a number of times. Usually when there's an update, we try to cover it and say, what is this? What is actually happening? What are the implications? And take a look at it again. So here we are one more time. And in this case, the the I mean, like you said, there are several sort of articles that all popped up during basically right around the Thanksgiving week for us here in the US. These came out of the EU and the UK. But basically, it sounds as though there were reports about Microsoft has suggested to the EU that they are willing to do a 10-year extension on the Call of Duty licensing to the PlayStation platform. Right. So that would guarantee Sony ongoing licensing revenue from, and of course the players would have access to the, presumably, we don't know the actual language here. They just said 10 years of Call of Duty.
Yeah.
We don't know if that means new titles or existing titles or what, but basically going forward, presumably, this would mean that PlayStation players would have access to Call of Duty games day and date with Xbox for up until something like, I think they said 2034.
Yeah.
Now,
I think that's 10 years on top of like the remaining 4 years or 2 years that they have left with the existing contract that they have with
Activision Blizzard.
Yeah.
Right. And what also came out was that apparently Microsoft had offered this behind closed doors to Sony, but Sony turned it down. Or something along those lines. So then Microsoft just came out and said, "Hey, what if we did this thing that's behind the scenes Sony already denied?" Yeah, we'll see, because I mean that's all we know is the headline that they have made this offer, or suggested that they'd be willing to go in on that as a bargaining chip,
right,
to allow the merger or the acquisition to go through.
Yeah.
And then finally, Sony made a point. They were trying to raise a point about, the Xbox. Microsoft talks big about wanting to have all games on all systems, where apparently they claimed something along the lines of Microsoft. It's sort of two-faced of Microsoft to suggest that, given that they would not allow PlayStation Plus on Xbox. As effectively what they stated, what that seems to imply is that they made an offer or made a request to Microsoft to put the PlayStation Plus subscription or make it available on the Xbox platform, which does seem a little bit weird to me. I think maybe they did that, or maybe it was we'll let you do this if you let us put PlayStation on all of your platforms, and I don't no idea how that, we don't know the details. All we know is
yeah, I mean, like the issue is we don't know the timing of all these things, right? Like, did this happen like 5 years ago before they tried to buy Activision, or is this stuff like fig leaves that they're offering now, so that if there was some sort of reciprocation going, like, yeah, absolutely, that they could use that and bring it to the regulators and being like, look, like, we did this and they turned it down. Like, Sony could have very well, after the Activision buyout started happening, gone to Microsoft going like, we're willing to do this. Like, would you really willing to do this, just so we can get the soundbite of you declining it, so that we can use this as like fodder for our arguments as to why the purchase shouldn't go through.
Yeah. So specifically, the statement from Sony is Microsoft's stance that Game Pass availability on PlayStation would be a panacea for the harm from this transaction rings particularly hollow, given that Microsoft does not permit PlayStation Plus to be available on Xbox.
Which is like a sort of like a no-duh thing, but like, yeah.
Right. I mean, it is also like, to an extent, is what are you trying to put a PlayStation Plus subscription in the Microsoft Game Store on Game Pass? Or is this because they specifically, they're talking about Xbox, not putting PlayStation Plus as a part of Game Pass, but they're suggesting PlayStation Plus on Xbox, which could be
like a separate service that would run on the Xbox platform.
Well, right. Yeah. Or even, I just want you to put the PlayStation Plus subscription offer. Like, you can buy the subscription on the Xbox store even though you can't do anything with it on the Xbox store. Like it's a little bit unclear from Sony's statement what that means, but it does seem to suggest any reasonable person would look at that title and say, oh, like infer that Sony may have at one point approached Microsoft and suggested, hey, can we get PlayStation Plus on Xbox devices so that people who have purchased and are subscribing to our content can play them on an Xbox.
Right.
I mean, especially the last generation when PlayStation Plus PlayStation 4 and Xbox One for some games had similar enough hardware that it might have made sense to do that. Or there were cross-platform games where having that would work. But I think having suggesting that you could have a front end application.
I mean, it's not that far off, right? Like you could do cloud streaming service on
yes,
Xbox,
you
right?
could do
like,
that,
and that's something
yes.
that is supported at least the high end, the high end tiers. Likewise, the same thing goes with like Xbox.
Well,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was going to point out. You mentioned these new tiers of the streaming, PlayStation Plus streaming. And I guess, what, I think you might be right, but given that they talk about Game Pass and all that, but to me, originally reading that, it's not clear whether they mean PlayStation Plus as it exists today with its multiple tiers and possible streaming, or if it meant like PlayStation Plus over the last 15 years.
No, I mean, like I said, my assumption is that they're extending these offers to Microsoft probably recently, once they made the Xbox Premium Plus or whatever they call it available. They're like, hey, put it on Xbox and we'll create a native app, And of course, Microsoft's going to be like, no. They're like, great, win-win for us. We make an offer that we weren't really serious about. We knew that you wouldn't seriously entertain, but we also get to use this as fodder for our arguments when it comes to arguing against your purchase of Activision.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, and even if they come back and say like, well, Sony's not taking Game Pass on the PlayStation, it's like, well, you didn't take PlayStation Plus on Xbox, right? So where's their incentive to reciprocate?
Yeah,
like that could very well be it. That's a good point. Yeah.
And to add to like our list of news stories, so I think there's 6 regulators that had to review this purchase. Brazil, Saudi Arabia. I want to say there's one more.
The EU.
Well, there's the EU, UK, and the US, but I believe there's one more in there that I'm forgetting. At the very least, Brazil and Saudi Arabia gave it like the thumbs up and let it kind of fly by. The EU and the UK have been the most vocal about going like, I'm not sure we can just let this pass. Like there are some serious concerns that we have. They're elaborating the concerns. Some people are trying to suggest that the EU or the UK, I believe, I think it's the EU, had made some mention about like, yeah, we want to see these the Call of Duty on PlayStation 2 going like, oh, there's bias here. But if you look at the arguments that are being made,
oh, actually, I don't know. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can't remember if it's UK or EU because both of them have been kind of reviewing and releasing press bites.
I want to say it was the UK. It was the CMA, but
yeah, it might have been the CMA. I really can't remember who it was, but it's leading them to like, oh, there's bias here. But I think that ignores the sort of foundation to the arguments they have. Both the CMA and the EU are approaching it differently on different aspects of it. But the US has been really quiet on it, oddly. Like, it's a huge purchase, and the FTC has said nothing. But this week, we also heard from the FTC about their stance on it, and there is strong suggestion that they're not going to take this lightly, and that they're also going to be investigating it more thoroughly as the Biden administration and the FTC is being pushed to, or they're pushing for the FTC to take stronger actions against these huge M&As that are happening lately, mostly because it is uncompetitive. Like, it squashes market competition, and hasn't generally been great for the past 20 years. It makes rich people really wealthy, but it doesn't really do much for the consumer and our ability to choose, and whether or not like one of these major companies does something that's not great, like how little recourse there is in the case that this happens. So the FTC seems to be taking a much stronger approach to this and it suggested that they're already running an investigation. They just haven't said much about it yet. So,
Right.
not great news for Microsoft in any case. Um, do you think all this is warranted? Like, I know we've discussed this before, but
I,
what's your feeling?
I do think it's warranted. I think the focus on Call of Duty is a bit um, sensationalist.
Yeah,
I think there are other valid reasons to be concerned about this move, and I think that the EU in particular, I think the UK as well, have called those elements out. They're just harder to discuss in a news report on the web that you can just sort of like digest
yeah.
easily. Like people get, I want Call of Duty on my stuff, but to discuss what it means to have a streaming platform that also owns its own, like a game streaming platform that has its own massive cloud infrastructure that is used for, multiple industries.
And that everybody else will be using for creating their own streaming service as well. Yeah,
Right. Yeah. I mean, the benefits that you have there that is anti-competitive just because you can do literally you have all of the resources.
or you
Like you don't.
prioritize improvements to your
Yeah.
system first, and
Right.
then later to other people's cloud infrastructure, that sort of thing. Yeah,
Yeah. All manner of stuff. You can just decide that you're going to charge them more. Like, oh, they're competing with us and they're starting to do well because they have this cool content that they're not going to license to. Okay, well, we're going to charge you money and we'll make money on that too.
yeah,
Like we're going to up the price. Like they have the ability for them, and I know that there are other cloud services out there that could compete with Microsoft in this space, but having the vertical integration on that scale is somewhat scary. And we're seeing that type of conversation happening across the board with our final. Coming up in a few minutes, we'll be discussing the Apple Google duopoly in a very similar sort of space. Not quite exactly this, but to my mind, taking a look at the Microsoft deal, where they have Game Pass, they have not only the hardware backend, the service layer, but also the content layer on lock, and you're sort of stuck. Like you will be all three of those things locked in. How do you where do you start to compete with that without somehow like convincing the world's richest people to dump billions of dollars on you to try to do a super risky move to try to
and not only
compete
that,
with Microsoft?
when it comes to richest people in the world, we also end up like, if you appreciate Western democracy, whether or not you do,
Yeah.
what is consistently been the case is that these enormous tech companies basically have to go to Russian oligarchs and Saudi royalty, even if it's tangential to like the actual crown prince, and basically authoritarians and regimes to be like, will you invest in my company? Like this is what Tesla and any major tech companies had to do. It's like, and this is a real fear of everybody now. It's just like, what do you do when your company's indebted to this sort of thing? And what does that mean for the company? So like, if you're looking at a competitor to Microsoft, like what has to happen for someone to be even remotely as competitive as Microsoft in the same sort of space? And it's just like, yeah, it's a giant mountain, especially if they own 60% of the game content that has been created in the past 50 years.
Yeah. Which, that was part of, they already bought two or three large companies and now they're buying one of the biggest.
Yeah.
And, filling out their stuff, even if they allow, 10 years of some titles, one title one large, to be fair, large title and popular title to remain multi-platform. All the other ones that they like, there are many other titles. Like even some of the articles that are online right now sort of discuss that in terms of, well, what about Overwatch and Diablo and these other games that they could just say like, what, for the console, we're just going to keep it to the
Right.
Game Pass.
Right.
You can't play it unless you're a Game Pass member.
Right. And like the arguments are like, well, it makes no financial sense. And I would argue like, yeah, that's correct. Like there's no way that Microsoft would have made this purchase in the short term and then
Right.
lock Call of Duty. It's probably why they have no issue saying, yeah, for the next 10 years we'll keep it on PlayStation. but like, what happens after that, right? Like, all Microsoft has to be able to do is gain significant dominance in the streaming game space, where they'll be the sole competitor in there, and then they can start using their IP as leverage to make it so that it's undesirable to use anybody else's platform, or in like the sort of like in the Netflix and the streaming space, like not have Netflix and rely on like one of the others. Like like there is no reason to think that Microsoft wouldn't leverage the IP to say, okay, now that this is successful as it is, like you have to, if you want to play 60% of the games that are released in this year, you have to be on Xbox Game Pass. There's no other option. And then if you want to play others, you can have the other streaming services if you'd like. Like that's
Right.
what I think the real concern is. Like, like should Microsoft have that much power? And I think there's a real concern that uh, if they do, the sort of and the streaming game space is successful, which I think it will be in the long run, like what
Oh
that
yeah.
means for market competition. I think those are the arguments to have, and we're really relying on Microsoft to be benevolent right now, and there's no reason to believe that they would be that way indefinitely.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they're playing the long game here,
Yeah,
on the order of decades. And for them, the fact that like, yeah, sure, 10 years out, like, well, fine. Like you can have Call of Duty for 10 years. That's fine. Because we're seeing this as like, we'll really be raking it in 15 years.
right. We have a
Um,
15-year plan for the streaming service, and in 15 years, we think it's going to be so, you know,
Ubiquitous.
yeah, and we promise that we will give you hard disk, but we will never allow you to stream a version of Call of Duty on your platform, right? Like that
Right.
that's something that could very well be part of their 10-year plan, right?
Yeah. All front ends will be front ends for Game Pass. Like the PlayStation, sure. We won't even need a PlayStation because it'll be built into your TV. Like
Right.
all displays will have an app that just streams the content.
Which I mean, I also think is the inevitable conclusion of like these high end
Oh
consoles
yeah.
is like at some point it just doesn't make sense to have a buy in be $500 $600 for you to just to play the game. The real thing that will help expand the market is not requiring a hardware buy, and just being able to plug it into your TV or have like a basically what a streaming stick is today, to be like, yeah, that's all I need, and now I can play games. All I have to do is pay for like a $30 subscription per month, and I have every game at my fingertips.
Yeah.
That's probably the inevitable future of the game industry for the most part, not entirety, but at least like the way the console space looks right now. So Microsoft having as much power as it's like trying to get, and the clear desperation of them, like, no, we want the Activision deal to go through, like we're willing to do whatever. They're not just dropping the deal, they're going like we'll make concessions, tells us that like no, like the Activision and them having this large of a third party developer is important to what they see as the future success of their
It
game streaming platform.
yeah, it is a huge part of their strategy. So they're willing to they will be willing to make concessions. Now, would that be good in the short term? Sure. They probably will all be time limited and we're going to see things change. Now, 10, 15 years out is that like trying to predict what will happen within even 2 years is sort of silliness. They have a strategy, how they manage it, and I mean their strategy may look good on paper now. It's going to have to change and evolve as market forces, come and go. But they are trying to set themselves up for a certain success, and it is thankfully there are certain bodies that are trying to suss out whether or not those like this move may be the beginning of a like a dark era for competition in the space.
Yeah, like there's a long term
So
plan here, and we need to heed that and not like look
right.
at it just on face value and be like, what's the big deal? They're allowing it to be on PlayStation for now. It's like, yeah, because there's a big deal in the long term of things, like whether or not we actually see that. But like I don't think we should have to rely on Microsoft or any single corporation to be benevolent enough with their ownership of things to make it so that like I as a PlayStation owner or I as an Xbox owner are still able to get access to 80% of the games, with the like 20% being exclusive to the console. Like it shouldn't be 60% of games being exclusive to a single console and at the behest of like that company's willingness to have those games be on other platforms.
Yep.
Anyways, not much more to dwell on. I'm sure we'll have more news, and as this stuff gets litigated, more stuff leaks out about like Sony's plans and Microsoft's plans and internal dealings that we normally don't get to see. So I'm sure we'll have more to report on this like next week or the week after.
Yep.
Well, let's move on to the last subject here. EU goes after the Apple Google duopoly. This is kind of an interesting one, and it kind of came out of left field as well. Mainly because it's kind of been something that has been in process for a while. To start, well, everybody knows Google, Apple, and their Play stores. This is what it's about, both their Play stores and how much control they have over the mobile markets. A court case by Epic, which was going mostly against Apple, but it contained both Apple and Google, was going through the California court system in 2021, or concluded in 2021. The main claims there were how it is that Apple and Google expect to make money, and the things that they've done to make sure that games don't leave their platform, or an alternative mobile market store isn't created that could compete with theirs. I think they prevented, or Google ended up paying Activision some huge sum of money to prevent them from making their own mobile store.
320 million or something like that.
Yeah, like some stupid amount of money just to be like, don't keep it on our platform.
Yeah. For 3 years or something.
And what ultimately was concluded was that there was not really any wrongdoing. There was some concessions that I think Apple had to make, and Google possibly as well. But the conclusion is that based off the information that was provided during that case, there was no clear connection that there was any specific wrongdoing. However, had other evidence been provided, says the judge at the conclusion of this case, there might have been a case to consider it a duopoly, and there could be, if additional evidence was provided, there may be a real antitrust case against both of those companies in the fact that they have a duopoly. But that's kind of like where it was left. There was no follow-up suits, at least that I know of. I think the investigation that was being done by the federal government was kind of just dropped and it was done. But now we get this report early last week. I think it was last week. I think it was the 21st, where it was reported that the UK CMA, which is their competition market authority, that they would be investigating a claim by Microsoft about cloud gaming in mobile browsers. But it focuses on Apple and Google and their duopoly. It's actually like specifically claiming this is a duopoly and their control over the space is problematic. It focuses on cloud gaming in mobile browsers mostly because cloud gaming or cloud gaming apps wanted to be placed on the Apple App Store, and Apple is basically outright denying it, which is forcing companies like Microsoft, which has their Game Pass platform, to run it off of a browser instead of a native app.
They're denying it in its current form. Right. So Apple said, we can allow you to have this on here, provided that you allow people to subscribe to Game Pass using our subscription service layer, and therefore we get a 30% cut of all money that comes through. In which Microsoft was like, ha, no.
Yeah, right.
And they also had some requirement about this, like basically when you get a store or an app like that, it becomes a store. It's like a store within a store, even though it's basically a catalog that you download and you can play the titles for. And that was sort of one of the concepts, was that it becomes something like what Netflix has done with their service, with the exception of the fact that Netflix has games. And when you subscribe with Netflix, you get with certain tiers, you get access to games on like mobile games, and you can download those games even without a Netflix subscription. But in order to play them, you have to have a Netflix subscription.
Right.
So it's not cloud gaming in the way that Game Pass has streaming, but it is a way for them to have games that they can publish, but that you have to have a subscription to their service to play. And now, if I recall correctly, Netflix does allow you to subscribe through the App Store, and therefore they lose a 30% cut
Right.
or whatever that Apple takes. But they have so far made it work with that concession.
Well, I think what they do is they direct people away from the App
To
Store
the
onto their
website.
website, and then from the website have them sign on. And I think this is actually one of the things that Apple
Yeah,
was asked to concede in the California case, is that
that's
like
right.
you have to allow people to give them a circumvention of your
Enable another
fairly,
payment option. Yeah,
yeah, your walled garden approach to everything, which is forcing everybody to accept
use
payments
right.
through the Apple platform, allowing them to take 30% of everything, which is, I think, on face value is quite ridiculous, both for Google and Apple, that like you can take 30% of any, like they're not providing anything besides a marketing platform for an app, and then everything else is done off of them, and they're still sucking in 30% of whatever you're doing. It's just like that's a huge amount of money, and there has to be concessions with the way they do things.
Yeah, I mean, technically they're paying for hosting and bandwidth, but like at this point, those numbers are super cheap. This isn't like 2000 anymore.
Not only that, for a subscription service where they're hosting of the app and the and aspects of that, it was like because they also have like what is it, the Apple game, I
Oh,
don't know.
Arcade.
Yeah, Apple Arcade, and aspects where like they have basically like achievements and profiles and all that
Oh,
stuff.
oh, Game Center.
Game Center, there we go.
Yeah, yeah, the Game Center
Um,
service.
that stuff, but like, okay, that makes sense if you're a game that's using that
Layer
layer to
or
like enhance your game. They're taking 30% of a one-time fee, and then taking 30% of like any sort of add-ons that are bought. But like a subscription
right,
service like Netflix, which only is the app that's hosting, and then it's like, oh, I get $15 after every month that someone's paying for your subscription. Is like it is ridiculous. It's like
right.
there is no reason that you should have any
It,
rightful claim to that money.
it's a tax where it's a substantial amount of money for what they get in return at some point, right? Like, yes, it makes sense that they're paying for the payments infrastructure and for all this other stuff. Like that's not something that Apple can just provide for free ad infinite, like forever. They have to
Right.
pay people to maintain it and do everything else. This is something that the businesses themselves would have to pay for. So it makes sense that they pay something to Apple for this, but not 30% necessarily. Like
Yeah, I mean,
even
like
pay,
you look at how much revenue Netflix pulls in, and say it's like whatever $22 billion in like a given year. Like I don't actually know what it is they're pulling in, or what their gross revenues are, but imagine taking 30% of that just to Apple, just be like, yeah, because you hosted the app on Apple platforms.
right.
Like
Yeah.
that's a ridiculous idea.
It makes, I would say to me, it sort of makes sense up until a point. There's like, it feels like a cap would really help everybody. Like, yeah, you'll take 30% for like the first 100,000 people or whatever, right? That guarantees you, I don't know, like, or what, you get up to $1 million. Then after that, like you've sort of covered the costs of the service,
Right, or like
like
finite
for a
caps on
year or
subscriptions per
whatever.
year and what Apple can take as part of its revenues. It's like, yeah,
Right.
that's
Right.
um
But what they've done instead is said, well, if you make under $1 million, we'll take 12%,
yeah.
or
Or they
something
have
like
specific deals, which I think they've cut out for some
or
companies. Like it was Call
20%.
of Duty, they're like, oh, we'll only take 15%, or I don't
They
even know
do
what it
one
was.
off. Yeah, they also have special deals with some people. Yeah.
Again, using their
And
leverage to be like, don't create a competitor. Like we don't want that. We want to be able to take like hundreds of millions of dollars from your revenues
right,
because people play Call of Duty, Warzone on Apple devices.
right. And Google gets we've been focusing on Apple, but they're the more clear
Well,
example.
also because
Google also
Apple,
has that.
it's a heck of a lot harder to sideload an app compared to
Yes,
Google's.
that is true. You can actually sideload another app or even an app store on Android devices. It is not necessarily for the faint of heart, but it is something that can be done and
Yeah,
is
and
done.
they've made it. I think they've made it more difficult over time. I think before you could
I
just
think so.
say, accept apps from other like unsigned sources, and then you know, but they would throw up a warning that's just like, by doing this, you may expose yourself to malicious, malicious software that could, you know, and for someone who is, I don't know, from a PC generation, who would like open up emails and get viruses, that may seem like a ward that works. I don't know, but either way, the UK is looking at both of these cases, and I think probably rightfully so, as to how much control Google and Apple have and how much force they have exerted on companies to prevent competitive marketplaces from erupting.
Right. Part of the instigation behind this, by the way, is specifically that, you know, these two bodies do a lot of outreach to industry people who are affected by it. They did that. They're doing that with the Microsoft's Activision Blizzard buyout, and they're doing it with this duopoly, investigation. But basically, what they've done is said to people who are affected, people who have tried to do cloud game initiatives and game developers on mobile platforms who are of a certain size, they've gone out to them and said, "Hey, what are your concerns here? What are some of the problems?" And some of what they heard, they specifically called out, is the fact that, at least in Apple devices, you have the App Store, but Apple has these sort of draconian rules that are very particular about making sure they get their 30% cut. So then you're like, okay, well, we'll do it in the browser. But Apple only allows Safari. You have no choice but to use Safari. And some people have been suggesting that Apple has been intentionally sort of nerfing the capabilities of their mobile browser, that it's not, that it has certain bugs and issues. What's that?
Apple nerfing some of their own software to make a usability issue to prevent competition? Never.
Right. Yeah. And like, to be fair to the Safari developers, that some of their engine is extremely fast. Like, their JavaScript engine is extremely fast. They do certain things very, very, very well. And it has remained relatively competitive with some of the best from Google and Microsoft in the Chromium browser set, as well as, remaining competitive with Mozilla and the Firefox browser and their respective JavaScript engines. But there are still bugs. Like, every browser has bugs. And if you don't have the option to, like, for instance, on Android devices, you can install a Mozilla browser and get the Mozilla JavaScript engine running on it. If you have the Chrome browser on an Apple device, it's Safari in a Chrome wrapper. It looks like Chrome, but internally its engine is running Safari, which is a requirement of Apple. And that's one of the concerns that presumably Microsoft, but others are raising here, which is like, we have two options. We can release an app, which Apple controls the environment for, or we can release a web page, which Apple controls the environment for.
Right.
And if there's bugs in one of them, we have to use the other. Like, the more open platform is the browser, but it has issues that stop us from using it. What do we do? How do we serve those people? We can't, right? So that's the major concern that has really flagged this issue for some folks in the CMA and the EU. And I think it may, while that's not exactly the same case with Google, the fact that Google was paying people hundreds of millions of dollars to not make another store.
There's obvious wrongdoing on Google that was kind of discovered when we were hearing about the Activision Blizzard case, where it's just like, paying people to prevent them from doing something is anti-competitive behavior that should be flagged and should be investigated and should be considered when allowing someone that owns 60-70% of the mobile market, at least the OS, that's the thing that should be considered. It's like, it's been like a good 30 years where regulators across the world have just kind of turned a blind eye to what tech companies have been able to do and the monopolies they've been able to get and the billionaires that they've been able to generate. And although that can be good for some countries that hold those billionaires, it's certainly not good for the competition and the consumers who have to work with these platforms, or anybody who wants to release on them and use them as a marketplace for expanding that platform's capabilities. But I don't know.
what would be interesting would be to see the tech companies come after, not the tech companies, I'm sorry, regulatory bodies take a serious, real look. I think there was an initiative for this, maybe, but it sort of puttered, and maybe it was because of the American administration at the time, federal administration. But I think there was some interest in looking into the sort of duopoly in the advertising space between Facebook and or now Meta and Google, who were doing like classic price fixing on the advertising markets that they controlled.
Right.
Like you, in order to you had a certain amount of cost per to advertise through on the web. They were controlling and like agreeing behind the scenes on how much they would charge and like for placements all over the web,
Right.
as well as a number of other sort of monopolistic moves, duopolistic moves, where they were sort of back alley deals, shaking hands about, yeah, we'll do this and it'll look great because it looks like we're competing, but we're actually not.
Yeah.
You know, and that's in line with what you were talking about over the last 20, 30 years, where people have not been sort of keen on regulating the tech industry. That's powered the growth of Google and Facebook in particular.
Right. And it's about time that like more is done. Whether or
Yeah.
not it will, you know, probably
Who
largely
knows?
depends on how well like a Western democracy survives, or democracy in general survives. But yeah, this is the sort of thing that like needs to happen, because whether or not you like it, it's probably undermining your ability to, you know, in some way, either if it's your personal connection with your phone or your web browser, or it's, you know, specifically your businesses. These things do have large effects on them, and hopefully regulators actually start taking a serious look at the way these companies have been operating.
Yep.
All right. Anything else?
I think that sort of covers it
Sure does.
for this week. Yeah.
All right. Well, great. I think that's it for us. Thanks everybody for watching. If you want to watch more of this, you can like and subscribe. Give us feedback. It does help. So hopefully we'll catch you next week. Thanks everybody. Take care.
See you then.